4A. When Fort Concho was active, how was the local environment affected? In the 1800s, Western expansion required military help. So the U.S. government set up a system of forts. And when the Civil War ended, the Concho Valley area was chosen to receive a fort. The mission of that fort was to provide traveling immigrants, mail carriers, cattle drivers, land surveyors, etc., safety from Native Americans and all kinds of bandits. But before building could begin, non-military contractors made bids to provide services for the fort. Contractors won bids. Enlisted men and officers were chosen. People moved to the site. And the fort was to begin in 1867. The military personnel, about 400, and contractors, about 100, were a large group living on a relatively small piece of land. There were even children living in the area. Some overcrowding issues arose. For instance, for a while there was no organized way of getting rid of their wastes. At the same time, buffalo hunters camped near the fort. They stored buffalo hides, bones, and fermenting tongues out in the open until they could be freighted to the east. Rain there certainly must have had a negative effect on river runoff for a while. Also, for about a year, sawmills were set up to harvest large river trees for the fort's buildings. After removing the best, oldest trees, they ran out of adequate trees for lumber. The fort still progressed, though, as freighters brought lumber with other necessities from Fredericksburg. But losing ancient pecan trees was damaging to the river ecosystems. It's doubtful that anyone remediated the riverbeds by planting young trees to replace the ones cut down, because back in the 1800s, this concept was unheard of. And we'll never know how big some of the pecan trees were before they became part of fort structures. Photography was very difficult back then. We can only imagine. Did small trees escape the axe? No. Smaller trees would inevitably become firewood for cooking, heating, and steam engines. For the next 20 years, wood was used until coal became available in about 1888. So imagine that fort structures are being built, soldiers are supplying safety, contractors are helping the fort. Continue to imagine that those 500 people need to eat 3 meals a day. There was plenty of meat to go around, and non-perishable foods came up from Fredericksburg. So the Bismarck Farms was set up. It grew irrigated fields of fresh foods to supplement freighted food. The river was dammed, causing water to flow to the food crops. Though the dam was helping the fort, all dams hoard water away from downstream neighbors. In this case, it didn't really matter because the fort itself was the downstream neighbor. And then there were the animals. All of the horses, mules, and livestock needed hay. So at least 3 hay camps were set up. One of them was as far as 22 miles from the fort. Fortunately, when they cut the native prairie grass for the fort's hay, the impact to the environment was as minimal as a prairie fire or migrating buffalo herds. But could people and animals live without water? Of course not. That's one of the reasons why the site chosen for the fort was between and near two rivers. Getting river water and animals together wasn't easy, but far easier than getting water for the humans. Getting spring water drinkable for humans required effort. First, they had to scout around for the closest good producing spring. They found one about 2 miles south of the post. Then they had to build a spring basin under the spring but above the river. That project may have been the first constructed spring basin in the area. Then they had to send wagons, barrels, and buckets daily to get the water. But all in all, the spring basin was no environmental hazard. Next to the spring basin was one of the places where rocks were cut and shaped, a quarry. Stones were loaded, sent to the fort where masons and soldiers created the buildings. The stones were removed from places that had been homes to native plants and animals. But because the Concho Valley has so many rocks, no one would claim that the quarries had any impact on the environment. A lesson has been learned. In the present, if you remove resources, you must remediate. This means you restore the place to its natural state. The fort was built with sweat, perseverance, and good intentions, but no remediation. There's hope today that progress doesn't have to take advantage of resources.